I still remember the first time I drove up the winding gravel road that led to the ranger station. The Appalachians have a way of pressing in on you, like the ridges themselves are alive and leaning over your shoulder. The road coiled up the side of the mountain, hemmed in by thick walls of trees whose trunks were so close together that the forest floor was almost black at midday. My headlights cut the green shadows into ribbons, but beyond that cone of pale light there was nothing, only the feeling that I was being watched. The air grew cooler the higher I climbed, and by the time the cabin came into view, a fine mist had started to creep between the pines. The ranger station wasn't anything like I'd imagined. I thought of glossy brochures, neat wooden lodges with freshly painted signs. Instead, this building looked weary, slouched against the mountainside as though the forest had been pressing its weight into the roof for years. The logs were stained dark from rain, and the porch sagged in the middle. Only the faint yellow light burning behind one crooked window said anyone was still inside. I parked my truck and killed the engine. Silence dropped immediately, thick and absolute. Out here, silence didn't feel empty. It felt like something had swallowed every other sound. Even the insects and birds had gone still. I had grown up in towns, around the low hum of traffic, and voices leaking through walls. Standing there in the damp mountain air, smelling wet earth and wood smoke, I felt small, insignificant. The door creaked before I even knocked, and an older man stepped out. He had the kind of face carved by both weather and worry. Deep-set eyes, leathery skin, beard gone more silver than brown. His ranger uniform was faded, his boots caked with red clay. He didn't smile when he saw me, just gave a small nod, as though he'd been expecting me, though I'd never met him before. "You're the new night shift," he said. His voice carried the scratch of too many years of cigarettes and cold mountain air. "Yeah," I answered, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "They said you'd be—" He cut me off, gesturing toward the porch with one gloved hand. "Come inside. Long drive." The interior smelled of coffee, pine cleaner, and something older, like damp paper left too long in a basement. A desk stood in the corner, piled high with folders and maps. There was a wood stove in the corner, coals, still glowing inside, throwing a dull red light across the walls. Everything looked serviceable but worn. A patched leather chair, a lamp with its shade taped back together, scuff marks on the floor where countless boots had come and gone. The man walked to the desk and pulled out something I hadn't expected. Not a key, not a form, but a thick, battered notebook with duct tape around its spine. He set it on the table between us with the same gravity a priest might use laying down a Bible. "This'll keep you alive," he said. I laughed, a nervous edge slipping out before I could stop it. "What, like a field guide?" His expression didn't change. He just slid the notebook toward me. "Read it, memorize it, don't question it too much." I placed a hand on the cover. The leather was cracked and soft, corners chewed by age, and across the front was a faded stamp of the National Park Service. But the feel of it was wrong, like the weight inside wasn't just paper. Something about it unsettled me. "What is it?" I asked. "The rules," he said simply. I flipped it open. The first page was written in a cramped, hurried script, letters slanting like the writer hadn't wanted to linger on each word. I scanned the list. Rule 1. Do not whistle after dark. Rule 2. Avoid looking directly at reflections in still water. Rule 3. Never accept food offered by locals after midnight. Rule 4. If you hear your name called from the tree line, do not answer. Rule 5. Never shine your light into the trees after 3:15 a.m. Rule 6. Do not search for anyone who disappears, no matter how close they are to you, and more. Pages of them, each numbered, some crossed out, others added in different handwriting. I looked up at him, waiting for the punchline, but his face was stone. He just stared at me with those pale eyes, waiting. "You're serious," I said finally. "Has a heart attack," he muttered. He rubbed at his jaw, clearly tired. "This place runs on rules. You follow 'em, you get to hand this book off to the next one. You don't." He let the silence stretch. "Well, you don't." Something about the way he said it made the hairs on the back of my neck rise. "Why?" I asked. He shook his head. "You'll see soon enough. Just keep the damn rules." For a while, we talked business, radio codes, trail patrol routes, emergency procedures, but it was clear he didn't care about any of that. His eyes kept drifting back to the manual, as though he was relieved it was finally out of his hands. When the clock above the stove ticked past 8, he stood abruptly and pulled on his jacket. "Shift's yours now," he said. "I won't. Be here in the mornings. Don't bother looking." "Wait," I said, rising with him. "You're leaving?" "For good." He paused at the door, his hand on the frame. For the first time, his stern face softened. No, not softened. Fractured. Like a man trying not to let fear show through a crack. "You'll understand," he said. Then he was gone, swallowed by the mist outside. I was left standing in that crooked little cabin, holding the manual in my hands, staring at the rules written by dozens of hands over God knows how many years. My watch ticked softly. The forest, pressed close against the windows, black and endless. The night was waiting. The manual sat heavy in my lap like it carried more than paper. The longer I stared at its pages, the less it felt like a set of instructions and more like a confession. Rule after rule, written in different hands, some neat, some jagged, some scrawled as though the writer's hand had been shaking too badly to form words. A few lines had been scratched so deep into the paper the pages tore. Others were written faintly, fading to near invisibility, like the ink itself didn't want to stay. That first night, I read every page. Not because I wanted to, but because the silence outside pressed against the cabin walls and I couldn't bring myself to step out yet. The rules were strangely specific, even bizarre. If the trees go silent before midnight, wait inside with the lights off until you hear the crickets again. If you find an extra trail that doesn't appear on the map, do not walk it, ever. If you see someone you know standing at the edge of the clearing, check their shadow. If it isn't there, close your eyes until they leave. Don't lock the door between 2 and 3 a.m. Something always tries the handle, and locked doors make it angry. The list went on like that, rules that sounded insane, until I realized how deliberate they were. These weren't the ramblings of someone paranoid. They were written by people who'd tested the boundaries and lived to warn the rest of us. The time the clock struck 9, I closed the manual and rubbed my eyes. My first patrol was scheduled, and the last thing I wanted was to start my new assignment by hiding indoors like a coward. I clipped on my radio, grabbed the flashlight, and stepped out into the night. The air outside was cold enough to bite. A dampness clung to it, carrying the smell of pine needles and wet soil. Mist hung low, hugging the ground and seeping around the base of trees like smoke. My boots sank into the soft earth of the trail, and every step echoed louder than it should. The crunch of gravel and fallen leaves carrying out into the stillness. At first, it seemed normal, just a forest at night. My light caught glimpses of moths drifting through the beam, their wings dusting the air like powder. Occasionally, a bird stirred in the branches. My breath fogged in front of me, curling away in the pale beam of the flashlight. But the deeper I walked, the more aware I became of the quiet. Not the peace and quiet you'd hope for in the woods. This was a layered hush, a silence so deliberate it felt like something was holding its breath, waiting. My ears strained for any sign of life. Crickets, owls, even the rustle of squirrels. Nothing, just the sound of my own boots and the faint rasp of wind. I remembered the rule. If the trees go silent before midnight, wait inside with the lights. Off until you hear the crickets again. I checked my watch. 9:47. Not midnight. Not yet. I tried to steady my breathing and pushed forward, telling myself the woods just felt strange because I wasn't used to them yet. Half a mile down the trail, I reached the old fire tower. Its steel frame rose against the moonlight like the bones of some giant animal, skeletal and rusted. A dim lantern burned inside the glass room at the top. As I started to climb, a voice called out behind me. "Thought you'd never make it." I froze. Turning, I spotted a figure leaning casually against the base of the tower. Ranger Ellis. I'd been introduced to him briefly in the paperwork shuffle before I came up the mountain. A wiry man in his 40s with sharp features and a restless energy, like someone who'd drunk too much coffee and never slept it off. He had a grin plastered across his face, but his eyes didn't quite match the smile. "Easy there," he said, lifting both hands as if calming me. "Didn't mean to spook you. First night's always the roughest." I exhaled, relief loosening my shoulders. "Christ, you can't sneak up on me like that." "Not sneaking," he said. "Just checking you'd show. Most rookies don't make it past the first night once they read that book." I glanced at him sharply. "You mean the rules?" His smile faltered. For a second, his eyes flicked toward the trees as though checking for something. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its casual edge. "You follow them, right?" I hesitated. I'm trying to. But what are they, really? Some kind of hazing thing?" Ellis shook his head slowly, the grin gone now. "They're everything. Break them, and the mountain decides you're fair game." He leaned in slightly. "You don't want to be fair game." The way he said it left no room for humor. I swallowed hard, nodding. We climbed the tower together, the metal stairs groaning beneath our boots. From the top, the forest stretched out forever, rolling ridges in every direction, trees swallowing the land like an endless tide. The lantern inside the lookout burned weakly, casting a circle of orange around the glass walls. Ellis leaned against the railing and lit a cigarette, smoke curling into the night. "Used to be a dozen of us on rotation," he said, staring out at the sea of trees. "Now it's down to 3 regulars. You, me, Denise, and the old guy who handed you the book. Not that you'll see him again." "Where'd the others go?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "Some transferred. Some didn't make it. You'll figure it out soon enough." He changed the subject quickly after that, pointing out landmarks, giving me the rundown of trail names, talking about the supply driver, who came once a week, ordinary stuff. But every so often, I noticed his eyes dart toward the dark tree line, scanning as if he expected something to move. At one point, I asked him about the rules again. "Look," he said, grinding the cigarette under his boot. "Don't get obsessed with the why, just think of them like road signs. Ignore a stop sign. You might survive. Might not. But sooner or later, something's going to hit you. Same here. The rules are warnings, not explanations." He clapped me on the shoulder before heading down the stairs. "You'll do fine, rookie. Just don't whistle. And for God's sake, don't look too long in the ponds." When he was gone, I stayed up in the tower for a while, staring at the forest. The longer I looked, the stranger it seemed. The mist pooled in the valleys like water filling a basin, and the trees seemed to ripple with it, shadows shifting even when the wind was still. I thought I saw movement once, something pale and long slipping between trunks, but when I blinked, it was gone. By midnight, I returned to the cabin. The radio crackled with Denise's voice, cheerful and warm, joking about how the newbie was, probably scared stiff already. I tried to laugh along, but my voice came out thin. When the call ended, I sat in the dark with the manual open on my knees. My lamp buzzed faintly overhead. There was a smear of something on the edge of one page, dark and crusted. I touched it with my fingertip before realizing it was dried blood. Someone had written beneath it, scrawled so violently it nearly tore the paper. "Don't trust what looks like yourself." I slammed the book shut, my heart pounding. And outside, for the briefest moment, I thought I heard something moving just beyond the porch steps. The third night was when the forest started to feel different. The first two had been quiet, unsettling, sure, but survivable. I stayed close to the rules, memorized them by heart, and repeated them like prayers under my breath. But on the third night, the woods began to notice me. It started subtle. I was walking Trail 7, a long, winding path that curved around the edge of a ridge. The beam of my flashlight swung ahead of me, pale light bouncing off roots and stones. It was late, just past 11, and I'd been out longer than usual, keeping myself busy because the cabin felt too claustrophobic. At first, I thought it was just wind, a low hiss passing between the branches, carrying faint sounds that could almost have been words. But the longer I walked, the clearer it became. Someone was whispering. I froze in the middle of the trail, every muscle tightening. The air had gone heavy, thick enough that each breath tasted damp, like breathing through cloth. I clicked off my light and crouched, letting my eyes adjust. The whispering grew louder. Not one voice, dozens. They slipped through the trees, weaving, in and out of one another, impossible to pin down. Some were close enough that I could swear. They were brushing past my ear. Others were distant, echoing faintly like murmurs at the bottom of a well. I strained to catch words, but it was like listening to a language I almost understood. A word here or there slipped through. Closer. Watch. Yours. My skin prickled as though cold hands were pressing against the back of my neck. The rules thundered through my head. If you hear your name called from the tree line, do not answer. It hadn't happened yet, but I knew, some instinct buried deep in my gut, that it was coming. I turned and began walking back toward the station, quick but steady, fighting the urge to sprint. The whispering followed, never fading, weaving through the rhythm of my steps. The beam of my flashlight shook as I swung it across the trees, desperate for solid ground, for anything to anchor myself. Then I saw them, two pale points of light, floating at eye level deep between the trunks. They weren't reflections. My light hadn't caught them. They glowed faintly on their own, round and unblinking. Eyes. They blinked once, slowly. I stumbled back a step. The eyes didn't move, but the whispers surged louder, curling around me like smoke. I tried the radio. My hand shook as I fumbled for it, static cracking when I pressed the button. Ellis? Denise? Anybody on channel? My voice cracked. For a long moment, nothing. Then, Rookie. Denise's voice, tinny and crackling through the speaker. You sound like you're about to piss yourself. What's wrong? I kept my eyes locked on that glow between the trees. Do you hear that? A pause. Hear what? The voices. The whispering. Silence stretched across the channel. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Lower, less joking. Don't let them say your name. You hear me? Keep walking. Keep your light on the trail. But they... Don't argue, she snapped, sharper than I'd ever heard her. Then softer, almost like she was afraid to be overheard. If you see eyes, don't shine your light on them. Just keep walking. I swallowed hard, every instinct screaming to run, to look, to demand answers. But I forced myself to obey. I kept my light trained on the path, boots crunching steadily, each step measured. The whispers followed me all the way back to the station. When I finally stumbled inside and slammed the door shut, I collapsed into the chair, gasping. My shirt clung to my back with sweat, though the room was cold. I checked the manual again, flipping pages until I found it. Rule 4. If you hear your name called from the tree line, do not answer. I read it over and over until the words blurred. That night, I didn't sleep. The next evening, I found Ellis already waiting at the tower when I arrived for patrol. He leaned against the railing with his usual restless energy, but when he saw me, his grin faltered. You heard them, didn't you?" he said. I hesitated. "The whispers." He nodded grimly. "Yeah, that means they've noticed you." I shifted uncomfortably. "What are they?" Ellis lit another cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his lined face. "Depends on who you ask. Denise calls them tree echoes. Old man used to say they were the forest's memory, pieces of everyone who broke the rules before us. Personally, I don't care what they are. I just care about staying alive." I swallowed. "And the eyes?" This time, he didn't answer right away. His expression darkened, smoke curling from his lips into the night. "Don't stare at 'em. They don't. Like being seen, think of it like bait on a hook. They'll hold still until you bite, then they'll pull you off the trail." I shivered despite myself. Ellis glanced at me, studied my face. "You'll be fine, rookie. Just don't get curious. Curiosity kills more rangers than the bears ever did." He clapped me on the shoulder before heading down, leaving me alone in the tower with the forest stretching endlessly below. But curiosity doesn't die so easily. Later, when my shift ended, I lingered by the porch, staring out into the trees. The forest was silent again. Not natural quiet, but that suffocating stillness that made my skin crawl. And then, so faint I almost thought I imagined it, something whispered my name. Not from the radio, not from the station, from the tree line. The voice was soft, almost pleading, a perfect imitation of my mother's voice carried on the night air. "Come here." My chest locked tight. My flashlight trembled in my hand. The rules screamed at me from the pages of the manual. "Do not answer." I bit my tongue until I tasted blood, staring at the dark woods, fighting the instinct to move closer. My legs wanted to obey. The voice was warm, familiar, coaxing. Then, just beyond the porch, a pair of eyes blinked open in the dark. I bolted back inside and locked the door, even though I knew I wasn't supposed to. By the fourth night, I was frayed at the edges. The whispers hadn't stopped. They didn't always come. Sometimes the woods were quiet enough that I almost convinced myself I'd imagined them. But every time I stepped onto the trail, I expected them. Every rustle of leaves, every sigh of wind made my chest tighten. That night I patrolled earlier than usual, hoping the forest might feel less hostile before midnight. I carried the manual in my pack, its weight comforting even though the words "inside" often scared me more than the silence outside. The first half of the patrol was uneventful. I checked the trail markers, logged the usual notes on conditions, and radioed into Denise, who teased me about my rookie paranoia. Ellis was quieter, his voice crackling through the static just long enough to confirm he was still out there. For a while, I almost managed to relax. The trouble started on the return leg, a narrow section of trail where the trees pressed close on either side. The air there always felt thicker, like the forest had decided to breathe slower. My boots crunched over fallen leaves, and before I realized it, I was humming under my breath, a nervous habit I'd carried since I was a kid. And then the humming slipped into a whistle. The sound was soft, tuneless, barely more than a breath forced through my lips. But the instant I did it, the forest reacted. The echo came back almost immediately, a faint whistle repeating my own note, drifting from somewhere deeper among the trees. I froze. My breath misted in the cold air, clouding the beam of my flashlight. My heart slammed hard in my chest. The rule seared through my memory. Do not whistle after dark. I clenched my jaw, furious at myself, but it was too late. The sound had already gone out, and now the forest was answering. Another whistle. Closer, this time. The same note, stretched longer like someone had taken my careless sound and was playing with it. I started walking again, faster, my boots snapping twigs and scattering gravel. I told myself to stay calm, to stay on the trail, but the forest had grown impossibly silent. No insects, no wind, just the crunch of my steps, and then another whistle right behind me. I spun, swinging the flashlight. Nothing, just trees, their bark damp and black in the beam. My breath hitched. Then the whistle came again. Not from behind this time, from the left, a little deeper, louder. I turned again, light slashing between trunks, my pulse hammering in my ears. The sound was playful now, taunting. Another whistle, followed from the opposite side, then another, farther ahead, each one mimicking mine but warped, stretched, coming from more than one direction at once. I realized with horror that they were circling me. I yanked the radio from my belt. "Alice. Denise, I broke a rule. I whistled. What do I do?" The radio hissed with static. No answer. The whistling built into a chorus, dozens of notes spiraling through the trees, each one slightly off-key, overlapping until they formed a twisted echo of my own sound. It felt like the forest itself was whistling at me. Something moved in the corner of my vision. I whipped the flashlight toward it. For a heartbeat, I saw a figure between the trees, tall, too tall, with limbs thin as branches. Its head jerked sharply to the side and then it slipped behind a trunk, vanishing before the light fully touched it. The chorus of whistles rose, sharp enough now to make my teeth ache. Panic, finally, broke through. I ran. The trail blurred beneath me, my beam swinging wildly, branches snapping across my arms and face as I barreled forward. The whistles followed, some near, some impossibly far, like they were driving me along the path, hurting me. I tripped once, caught myself on a root, and forced my legs to keep moving. When the cabin lights finally appeared through the trees, I nearly sobbed with relief. I didn't stop until I slammed through the door and collapsed against it, chest heaving. The whistles cut off the instant I crossed the threshold, leaving only the ringing in my ears and the thundering of my heart. The radio on my belt crackled. "Rookie," Ellis's voice, low and urgent. "Tell me you didn't answer." I swallowed hard, pressing the radio to my lips. I whistled. They started copying me, but I didn't answer. Silence on the other end. Then a long sigh. "You're lucky. They'll keep your sound now. They'll use it. But as long as you don't answer when they call you back, you've still got a chance." "Call me back?" I whispered. "Yeah," Ellis said grimly. "They don't let go easy." I didn't sleep at all that morning. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again, the echo of my own whistle, stretched and warped, drifting just beyond the walls. And once, just as I started to drift off, I could swear I heard it again, faint but clear, from the edge of the porch. Own whistle, calling me. By the fifth night, I had started to second-guess everything. The rules weren't just ink on paper anymore. They were guardrails between me and something waiting in the dark. The whistle incident had proven that. I carried its echo in my head like a parasite, always expecting to hear it again. That night's. Patrol sent me toward the Northern Trail System, a route that looped past an old pond. The manual mentioned it once in passing. Do not linger near still water. Reflections can't be trusted. I'd thought it was metaphorical, maybe just a caution about hallucinations. After what I'd seen, I wasn't so sure. The pond was a shallow basin ringed by reeds, its surface so perfectly still it looked like a black mirror stretched between the trees. The moon was high, casting silver light across the water. My boots squelched in the mud as I stepped closer, flashlight beam cutting a path across the glassy surface. That's when I saw it. My reflection. At first, it seemed normal, just me standing. At the edge, beam of light in hand, face pale in the glow. But then it moved, not like a ripple, not like an illusion. It moved when I didn't. My reflection raised its hand and waved. My own arm stayed at my side. The blood drained from my face. My knees locked, frozen between stepping back and stepping forward. The figure in the water smiled. my own mouth stretching into a grin too wide, teeth glinting in the moonlight. I stumbled back a step, nearly tripping in the mud. The reflection didn't falter. Its grin only widened, eyes too bright, too knowing. The rules roared in my memory. Avoid looking directly at reflections in still water. I squeezed my eyes shut, heart hammering. But curiosity clawed at me, whispering to look again. Just one more glimpse, just to see if it was real. I cracked one eye open. The reflection was still there, but now it wasn't standing where I was. It had stepped closer, filling the frame of the water's surface, towering over me from below. Its mouth gaped open in a silent laugh. The air around me thickened, heavy with the smell of stagnant water and something sour, like rotting vegetation. My chest locked. My breath came in shallow gasps. The radio at my hip crackled. Denise's voice came through, sharp and urgent. "Rookie, you're at the pond, aren't you? Don't look. Walk away. Now." I couldn't speak, couldn't tear. My eyes away. The reflection tilted its head, mirroring the way I always do when I'm confused, but it was wrong. The angle was too sharp, the neck bending too far, skin pulling tight across bone. "Rookie!" Denise's voice snapped like a whip. "Close your damn eyes and step back." I forced my lids shut and staggered away from the water, boots slipping. In mud, hands groping blindly until I felt solid trail beneath me. Only then did I dare open my eyes. The pond lay behind me, still and black, no longer showing anything but the moon and trees. My legs trembled as I dragged myself farther down the path, clutching the manual like a talisman. When I made it back to the cabin, Ellis was waiting. His face was pale, his usual restless grin gone. "You looked, didn't you?" he asked. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He saw it in my face. He exhaled through his nose, pinching the bridge of it like he was fighting off a headache. "They're tricksters, reflections. They start small, little movements, little smiles. If you watch too long, they learn you. And once they know enough..." He didn't finish. "What happens then?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Ellis's eyes flicked to the window, then back to me. "Then you won't be the one walking back from the pond." I felt sick. My stomach twisted as if something foul was still clinging to me. "Why didn't anyone warn me?" I asked. He tapped the manual. "You were warned. You just didn't." "Take it serious enough." Denise's voice came through the radio not long after, softer this time, almost sympathetic. "Don't beat yourself up too bad. We've all looked once. It's how they get their hooks in you. Just don't give them more to work with. Promise me." I promised. But the truth was, I didn't know if promises meant anything to the forest. That night, I left the manual open on my desk, a page marked with a note written in cramped, unfamiliar handwriting. "If your reflection ever waves, never wave back." I stared at the words until my vision blurred, and out of the corner of my eye, in the black glass of the window, I thought I saw myself smiling. By the 6th night, exhaustion pressed into my bones. Every sound carried double weight now. Every flicker of shadow seemed purposeful. I had been following the rules, strictly, religiously, but the mistakes I had already made clung to me. The whistle, the reflection. Both had left me marked in ways I couldn't yet measure. Denise radioed near midnight, her tone sharper than usual. "Station 2, Northern Ridge, now." I almost asked why, but something in her voice told me not to waste time. I grabbed my pack, flashlight, and the manual, then set out on the ridge trail. The forest felt different that night, thicker, more alive. The moonlight fell in shards between the branches, painting the path in jagged silver. The air smelled of smoke, faint but growing stronger the closer I walked. When I crested the ridge, the smell hit full force, burning pine and cooked meat. Down below, in a clearing I hadn't seen before, a bonfire roared. Around it stood figures, People, not creatures, holding torches and muttering in low voices that carried like a chant. I ducked low, pressing myself against the ridge's edge, heart rattling in my chest. There were maybe 20 of them. Some wore park ranger uniforms. Others looked like locals, their faces streaked with ash. All of them faced the fire, silent but for the chant. At the far side of the clearing, I spotted Denise. Her radio glinted at her hip. She was standing with them. For a moment, I thought she might have been a prisoner, but then she stepped forward, lifted something from the fire, a charred piece of wood carved with strange symbols, and held it to her chest as if in prayer. My stomach dropped. I wanted to back away, but my boot slipped on loose soil. The sound was tiny, barely more than a crunch, but the chanting faltered. A few heads turned toward the ridge. I pressed flat to the ground, willing myself invisible. The firelight licked across their faces as they searched the trees, and I saw their eyes gleam, not fully human, too wide, pupils blown like black pits. Then the chanting resumed, louder, covering the silence I'd broken. I didn't breathe until my lungs screamed. I made it back to the cabin before dawn, shaken, mud streaking, my clothes. When Denise returned an hour later, she smelled faintly of smoke. She didn't mention the clearing. Neither did I, but she caught my eye as she passed my desk and murmured under her breath, just loud enough for me to hear, "You saw, didn't you?" I stiffened, fingers gripping the edge of the manual. "What was that?" I whispered. Her expression flickered, something like guilt crossing her face. Then she leaned closer. "Not everyone follows the rules to survive. Some bargain. Some feed." My stomach turned cold. "Feed what?" Denise didn't answer. She just touched the edge of the manual, her fingers brushing the page I'd left open, the one warning about reflections. "Keep reading," she said quietly. "The rules are only the surface." Then she left, leaving the door swinging in her wake. That morning, as the sun rose and I finally allowed myself to collapse into the bunk, I couldn't stop smelling smoke. It clung to my clothes, my hair, my skin, and when I closed my eyes, I saw them again. The figures around the fire chanting to the flames as if feeding it something I couldn't yet name. For the first time, the forest didn't feel like the biggest threat. It was the people inside it. The knock came just past 2 in the morning, 3 sharp raps, perfectly spaced, echoing against the cabin door. I froze. My hands hovered over the manual, where a line glared back at me like a warning. "Do not answer a knock after midnight unless the caller speaks your full name." My pulse thudded in my ears. Whoever it was knocked again. 3 identical strikes, like a metronome. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then a voice. "Hey, it's Ellis. Open up." Relief surged through me for a heartbeat. But then the words repeated, exactly the same. Same tone, same rhythm. Like a recording played twice. "Hey, it's Ellis. Open up." The hair on the back of my neck bristled. Ellis never spoke without some little twitch of sarcasm, some restless shuffle in his words. This wasn't him, the rule flared in my head. "Do not answer unless they speak your full name." I stayed silent. Another pause. Then, "Knock, knock, knock. Rookie. Come on, it's cold out here, don't be an ass." This time the voice was rougher, impatient. It sounded more like him. My chest tightened. Maybe it really was Ellis. Maybe he was testing me, seeing if I'd follow the manual. I wanted to believe that. I almost did. And then, "Rookie." The voice softened, friendly, coaxing. "It's safe. Just open the door." A sharp chill swept the room, air seeping through the cracks around the doorframe. I could smell it then. Not Ellis's usual tang of cigarettes and coffee, but something sweet, like rotting fruit. My hand trembled on the doorknob. "Do not answer. Unless the caller speaks your full name." I knew the rule. I knew it. But fatigue had worn me thin, and doubt gnawed at me. If it really was Ellis and I left him out there, what then? What if he needed help? I broke. I cracked the door open. Cold rushed in like a tide. The lantern light flickered. Standing there was Ellis, or something wearing him. His grin was too wide, teeth too even, eyes too glassy. His skin looked stretched, almost shiny in the glow. "Thanks," it said, voice warping on the word, like two tones overlapping. Before I could slam the door shut, it lunged. I fell backward, crashing into the desk as the thing clawed at the frame. Its fingers were too long, bending at angles no hand should. The wood groaned under its grip. The manual slid to the floor, pages fanning out. My flashlight clattered beside it. I scrambled up, heart hammering, and swung the lantern toward the thing's face. It hissed, an awful, shrill sound, as if steam were forced through broken glass. For a split second, its features rippled, shifting, in and out of Ellis's likeness. Underneath was something pale and eyeless, mouth gaping too wide to be human. I slammed the door with all my weight. The thing screeched, pounding once, twice, then silence. When I dared to peek through the crack, it was gone. Only the smell lingered, that sour sweet rot curling in my throat. Ellis showed up at the station an hour later. The real Ellis. His boots were muddy, his face drawn, but alive. "Why the hell didn't you let me in earlier?" he demanded. I stared at him, words caught in my throat. My mind replayed the knock, the voice, the grin. He noticed my silence, eyes narrowing. "Wait. It came here, didn't it?" I didn't answer. That was enough. He spat onto the floor, muttering curses. "Told you, rookie. They learn. They watch. Mimicry's just the start. Once you give them an inch, they'll keep coming." I swallowed hard. What happens if I'd really let it in? Ellis's gaze flicked to the door frame, where faint gouges marred the wood. He didn't meet my eyes. "You wouldn't be asking me that question right now." The rest of the night dragged on like a punishment. Every creak of wood, every brush of wind against the cabin felt like another knock. I sat with the manual open in my lap, rereading the rule I'd broken, my skin prickling with shame and terror. Do not answer a knock after midnight unless the caller speaks your full name. It seemed so simple, but exhaustion, fear, the desperate need to trust, it had been enough to unravel me, and now the forest knew it. Ellis was the loudest voice in the ranger rotation, the one who could cut tension with a joke or deflect fear with a snide comment, which is why the silence when he vanished was unbearable. It started 2 nights after the mimicry incident. We were assigned overlapping patrols. He'd take the southern trail while I handled the ridge. Denise had warned us to stay close, to keep radios on, and to never, ever lose contact after midnight. But Ellis hated rules almost as much as he hated being told what to do. "Don't sweat it, rookie," he'd said over the radio at dusk, his voice crackling with lazy confidence. "If the forest wants me, it's going to have to work harder than whispering my name or knocking on my door." I wanted to argue. I wanted to remind him that the rules weren't optional. But his laughter rolled through the static, and I let it go. That was my mistake. The patrol was uneventful at first. Crickets buzzed in the undergrowth. The air was heavy, sweet with the scent of honeysuckle and damp earth. Moonlight dappled the path, shifting as clouds crawled across the sky. My radio hissed once, then twice. "Ellis," I whispered into the receiver. A long silence. Then, faintly, "Don't." The word broke into static, stretched thin and brittle. "Say, again?" My voice trembled. "Don't follow." The line went dead. My blood iced. Every instinct screamed at me to ignore the warning and find him, but the rules were clear about this too. If someone tells you not to follow, don't. I froze, on the trail, lantern shaking in my hand. Then, from somewhere in the distance, a scream. High-pitched, Strangled. Cut short! Ellis! My shout echoed through the woods, bouncing off trunks and disappearing into the night. Nothing answered, not even an owl. By dawn, Denise called the search. 3 rangers combed the southern trail. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign of struggle. It was as if Ellis had stepped off the earth. Only one thing was left behind: his radio. They found it at the base of a cedar tree, antenna bent, casing cracked. When they handed it to me, the smell hit first. Sweet, rot, that same cloying stench from the mimic at my cabin door. My stomach turned. Denise confiscated the radio before I could say a word. She stuffed it in her pack, lips pressed thin, eyes avoiding mine. He knew the risks, she said finally. Some people don't listen, and this forest doesn't forgive. Her words lodged in my chest like splinters. That night, I dreamt of him. Ellis stood at the edge of the cabin's lamplight, grinning the way he always did, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Rookie," he called. "It's just rules, words on paper. You gonna live scared forever?" But as he stepped closer, his grin split too wide, stretching until it carved his face in two. His voice fractured into static. When I woke, my cheeks were wet with tears. The station felt emptier without him. Denise grew sharper, her patience thinning with every passing night. The other rangers spoke less, eyes darting to the tree line as though expecting Ellis to wander back, whistling his off-key tunes. But he didn't. And sometimes, when the wind shifted, I swore I heard his voice, in the distance. Not calling for help. Calling me by name. The manual used to be my anchor. A battered little book of survival. Its pages smelled of smoke and mildew, but the words inside gave me structure when the nights turned strange. If I followed the rules, I lived. Simple, until the rules began to change. It was subtle at first, a line that looked smudged, the ink feathering as though someone had traced it with damp fingers. I thought it was fatigue, or the lantern's flicker playing tricks. But one night I found an entirely new rule written in the margin. Rule 12. Do not whistle after dark. The echoes are not yours. I read it 3 times, my stomach sinking lower each pass. That rule hadn't been there before. I knew it as surely as I knew my own name. The letters were the same scrawled hand as the rest of the manual, aged and uneven. Not fresh ink. Not something I, or anyone else, had added. And worse, I remembered whistling just 2 nights prior, to steady my nerves on patrol. Nothing had happened then. But now the thought of doing it made my throat close. I showed the book to Denise at dawn, when her shift ended. Her face darkened as she scanned the page. She didn't ask how it got there. She didn't accuse me of fabricating it. She simply shut the manual and slid it back toward me. "There, paying attention to you," she said flatly. "You've been noticed." I wanted to argue, to demand an explanation, but her tone carried the finality of a locked door. She strapped her pack on and walked out, leaving me alone with the cursed book. That's when I realized the rules weren't just guidelines. They were conversations, instructions written in real time. Someone, or something, was writing them, for me. The next night another change appeared. This time it wasn't an addition. It was a correction. Rule 3. If you hear your name in the trees, do not answer. Except now the page read. Rule 3. If you hear your name in the trees, do not answer, unless the voice is your mother's. My chest clenched. The ink looked as old as the rest, but the paper felt warm under my fingertips as though freshly pressed. I stared at it until my vision blurred. Why the exception? Why now? I hadn't spoken to my mother in months. Our last call ended in a fight, me hanging up on her mid-sentence. She didn't even know I'd taken the ranger job. So why would the rules change for her? I slammed the book shut and shoved it under my bunk. But hiding it didn't silence the thought. What if the forest could reach her voice, too? That night, it did. Around 1 in the morning, as I patrolled the ridge, a breeze carried a sound through the branches. Soft, familiar. Evan. My mother's voice, the syllables wrapped around me like a memory, pulling me back to childhood nights, when she'd call me in from the yard. Tender, patient, safe. I froze. The new rule seared in my mind. Do not answer, unless the voice is your mother's. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Evan, the voice coaxed again, closer now. It's okay. You can answer me. Tears pricked my eyes. The forest swayed like it was breathing, every leaf trembling with the sound of her voice. For a split second, I nearly broke. But then I remembered Ellis's grin splitting into something wrong, and the sour-sweet rot that followed every mimic. No, I whispered to myself, clenching my fists. Not this time. I didn't answer. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. And then the trees sighed, a deep, low sound like disappointment. When I returned to the cabin, the manual lay open on my desk. I hadn't left it that way. A new line had scrawled itself across the bottom of the page, the ink still glistening wet. You should have answered. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the lantern. I wanted to burn the book, to fling it into the fireplace and watch the pages curl to ash, but something in me knew it wouldn't work. The rules weren't written on paper. They were written on me, and the forest had already decided I was part of its story. The ranger station was never meant to feel like a fortress. It was just a squat wooden cabin on a lonely ridge, the walls weathered, the roof patched with tin sheets that rattled in storms. But after the rules began to change, after Ellis vanished and the forest started whispering in my mother's voice, the cabin became more than a home base. It became a cage. And one night, the forest decided to rattle the bars. It started with scratching. I was alone, Denise out on a short patrol. The others were scattered across different posts. Midnight had passed, and the air hung heavy with a coppery tang, like blood carried on mist. Then, scritch, scritch, scritch at the far wall. Slow, deliberate, like claws dragging wood. I froze at my desk. The survival manual sat open before me, its pages blank. No rules, no guidance, just empty space, waiting. The scratching circled the cabin, dragging along every wall. Then came the footsteps, dozens of them crunching in the gravel outside. Too many for one person, too heavy for deer. My throat dried. The rule about doors screamed in my mind. After midnight, do not open the door unless the knock comes in threes. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed in so thick I could hear my own pulse. Then came the knock. 1, 2, 3. I almost bolted to the door. Almost. But something stopped me. The rhythm was too perfect, too mechanical. Like a child who had memorized the pattern but didn't know the meaning. The knocks came again. Louder. 3 sharp raps that made the hinges groan. I held my breath. Then, from the other side, Ellis's voice. Rookie. Come on, man. Let me in. I staggered back. My stomach dropped as if the floor had vanished. Open the door, Evan, he said, softer now. Please. It's cold. The urge to obey clawed at me. Every part of me wanted to believe, to hope he'd somehow returned. But then I smelled it. The same sickly sweet rot that had clung to his broken radio. It wasn't Ellis. I backed away, lantern trembling in my grip. The door rattled violently, hinges squealing. The walls shook under pounding fists, claws, something. Heavier slamming against the wood. The windows rattled, shadows darting across them. I ran to the radio, grabbed the mic, and shouted for help. Static. Then a voice. Not Denise's, not any ranger's. Stop resisting." The words hissed through the speaker, warped and metallic. I dropped the mic, my skin crawling. The pounding rose to a frenzy. Something scraped across the roof, skittering fast, too fast, claws clacking against tin. Glass cracked as a window bowed. Inward, splinters showering the floor. The lantern flickered. My hands were slick with sweat. The manual on the desk wasn't blank anymore. Words bled across the page in jagged strokes. Rule 14. If the station is surrounded, do not pray. They like the sound. My knees went weak. My mind screamed to beg for help, to whisper any prayer I knew, but I clamped my teeth shut. Then, as sudden as it began, the assault stopped. The scratching ceased. The pounding stilled. The air grew still, too still, like the moment before lightning strikes. From the roof came one final creak, slow and deliberate, like something shifting its weight. And then, silence. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner, lantern burning low, the manual open in my lap. I traced the new rule over and over with trembling fingers. When dawn finally bled through the treetops, the station looked untouched. No claw marks, no broken glass, no footprints in the gravel, but the smell lingered, sickly, sweet, and wrong, as if they wanted me to know. The rules might keep me alive, but nothing would keep me safe forever. I hadn't left the station for 2 nights after the siege. Every creak in the walls, every gust of wind against the shutters made me brace for claws and pounding fists. But the manual didn't let me hide for long. When I woke on the 3rd night, a new entry had appeared. Rule 15. When the radio calls, after midnight, you must answer, and you must go where it tells you. The ink looked etched into the page, gouging the paper so deep it almost tore. And as if on cue, the radio crackled. "Station 3, come in. Patrol the ridge." The voice was distorted, layered with static. It didn't sound like Denise or anyone I recognized, but the rule sat heavy in my lap, undeniable. If I ignored it, the consequence might come faster than the forest itself. So I strapped on my pack, checked my flashlight, and stepped into the dark. The woods swallowed me whole. The path to the ridge was narrow, winding between jagged rocks slick with moss. The air was colder than it should have been for August, damp enough to bead my skin with dew. My breath fogged in the beam of my light. Somewhere behind me, leaves whispered as if something followed, staying just out of sight. I gripped the radio, wishing it would speak again, wishing for human sound. Instead, the static hissed like breathing. At the ridge's peak, I found the first wrongness. A circle of stones, perfectly arranged as if measured with tools, sat in the dirt clearing. Inside it, the grass was dead, brittle and black. The smell hit me next. Iron and mildew, thick enough to sting my nose. And in the center of the circle lay a torn ranger hat. Ellis's. I swallowed hard. My hands shook as I lifted it. The brim was sticky. Dark stains crusted the fabric. The rule about answering the radio had brought me here. But why? The manual offered no clue. That's when the voice came again. Not from the radio this time, but from the trees. Evan. Low. Drawn out. Familiar. Denise. I spun, flashlight beam slicing the trees. "Over here," she said. "Closer now. I need your help." I remembered the rule. If you hear your name in the trees, do not answer, unless the voice is your mother's. This wasn't my mother. I backed toward the path, whispering to myself, "Don't answer, don't answer." But the voice grew desperate. "Evan, please. I'm hurt. It's bad. Don't leave me here." My chest clenched. I wanted to run, but something in me wavered. If it really was Denise, if she was bleeding out, how could I leave? That hesitation was enough. The manual in my pack grew hot, as if burning against my spine. I yanked it out, flipped it open, and saw a new line bleeding onto the page, right beneath Rule 3. Correction. If the voice belongs to a friend in need, you must answer. If you don't, they will suffer. My stomach dropped. The rules weren't just guiding me anymore. They were trapping me. I raised the flashlight, voice cracking as I called into the dark. "Denise!" The forest exhaled. The leaves trembled. Something stepped into the beam. It looked like Denise, same uniform, same tired eyes, but her movements were wrong, like joints bending a fraction too far. And her smile. Too wide, stretched like her skin might split. "You came," she whispered. The smell hit me next. That same sickly sweet rot. My blood went cold. This wasn't Denise. I stumbled back, but it lunged, faster than it should have moved, arm snapping forward like a puppet on strings. Its hand brushed my shoulder, clammy and rough, nails digging too deep. I screamed and swung the flashlight. The beam cut across its face, if you could call it that. For an instant, I saw Denise's features slide like melting wax, eyes drooping, mouth splitting wider. It shrieked, recoiling into the shadows, and the trees erupted with more voices. Dozens of them, all calling my name, all voices I knew, my father, my childhood friends, old co-workers, layered over each other until the sound became a roar. I bolted. Branches clawed at my arms, roots tried to snare my boots, but I didn't stop until the station's lantern light broke through the dark. Inside, I collapsed against the door, chest heaving. The manual thudded to the floor, open to the newest rule. Rule 16, the forest will wear their faces. Do not trust them, no matter how much it hurts. Tears blurred my vision, my gut twisted with shame. I had broken the rule by answering. And now, somewhere out there, Denise, the real Denise, might be suffering for it. The next night, the air felt different. Too thin, too sharp, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. I'd grown used to the silence of the woods, the deceptive stillness. But this was worse. This silence pressed against my eardrums until they rang. The manual sat on the desk, swollen with damp, pages curling at the corners. Rules had been scrawled so deep into its paper that some bled through to the other side, carving ghostly echoes. I flipped through it with shaking hands, searching for anything that would help, but the words seemed to shift. Rule 1 was no longer at the front. Rule 1 had vanished. In its place. The first rule is that the rules will change. My stomach nodded. I couldn't trust the book anymore. But without it, I'd have nothing. The radio crackled then, sharp as broken glass. Station 3, respond. The voice was Denise's this time, or at least it sounded like her. My throat tightened. "Denise," I whispered, pressing the mic. "Where are you?" "Down by the fire tower. It's bad. You need to come." Her words broke into static, like something chewing the signal. I froze, remembering the circle of stones on the ridge, the forest wearing her face. Was this her, or another trick? The manual flipped itself open in my hands, pages fluttering though the windows were closed. The pen stroke appeared across a blank page like invisible fingers writing. Rule 17. If someone calls for you twice, you must go. Refusal means abandonment, and abandonment is punished. The radio spat her voice again, desperate this time. "Evan, please. Twice." I knew what that meant. I didn't want to go, but the rules had left no room for choice. The trail to the fire tower was worse than the ridge. No wind, no insect hum. Just the crunch of my boots and the constant gnawing awareness that I wasn't alone. Every so often, I'd catch it. A flicker of movement in the periphery. A pale hand curling around a tree. A face vanishing when the light touched it. The fire tower loomed black against the moonlight. Its wooden stairs creaked in the stillness, the railings slick with damp. As I climbed, the smell hit me, rot, copper, smoke. At the top, I found the lantern still burning, and beside it, Denise's jacket. Torn, but no Denise. Instead, a sound rose from the forest floor far below. Footsteps, dozens of them, moving in unison, circling the base of the tower. I froze, peering down. Shapes gathered at the clearing. Dozens, maybe hundreds of figures. Some wore ranger uniforms, some wore hiking gear, some looked like locals I'd seen in town, and some looked like no one I'd ever known, their bodies twisted, limbs too long, heads cocked at impossible angles. They tilted their faces up to me, in perfect silence. Then, in one voice, they spoke. "You're breaking the rules." The sound rattled my teeth, made the wood groan under my boots. I staggered back, clutching the lantern. The manual flared hot against my chest, and when I yanked it open, fresh ink bled across the page. Rule 18. Do not let them gather. If they gather, you must scatter them before they speak. If you fail, the rules reset. Reset. The word chilled me. Did that mean starting over? Replaying every horror from the beginning? Or something worse? The crowd below grew restless, shifting, whispering. My lantern flickered. Panic surged through me. I grabbed the flare gun from my belt, aimed into the night sky, and fired. The flare burst red, spilling light across the clearing. The figures shrieked, some scattering into the trees, others dropping to their knees as if burned. But not all of them fled. A handful climbed the tower, their hands curled over the wood, nails digging deep. Their faces stretched with too wide grins, eyes white and empty. The stairs groaned as they ascended. I fired another flare, then another. Two of them tumbled back, writhing, but the others kept climbing. The lantern guttered low. And then, below me, the voices rose again. A chant, rhythmic and low. Reset, reset, reset. The manual burned in my hands, pages glowing like coals, words twisted into shapes I couldn't understand. I dropped it. The book hit the floorboards and burst open, pages flipping madly until they landed on a final scrawl. Rule 19. If the rules collapse, so do you. The tower shook under the weight of them. Clawed hands gripped the railing just feet away. I didn't wait to see more. I hurled the lantern over the edge, flames scattering into the clearing, and ran down the opposite stairs, boots thundering against the wood. The forest erupted with screams, not human but not animal either. Shadows flailed against the firelight. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I just ran. When I reached the station again, hours later, my lungs were raw, my clothes torn, my legs trembling. The station door stood ajar. Inside, the manual sat on the desk again, whole, clean, as if it had never burned. But the cover was different now. Where the title had once read Survival Manual, it now read, in bold black strokes, Obedience Guide, and I knew then I wasn't following rules to survive. I was following them to serve. By the time the next night fell, I had stopped trying to sleep. Sleep wasn't rest anymore. It was surrender. Every time I closed my eyes, the rules rewrote themselves in my dreams, crawling across the inside of my eyelids in black ink, drilling their way into memory. The manual lay on the desk, impossibly. Clean, its new title, Obedience Guide, shining like tar. I couldn't look at it without bile rising in my throat, but ignoring it wasn't an option. Ignoring was the same as breaking, and breaking was death. Or worse, Denise hadn't returned. Neither had the others. Their radios still hissed and spat static, sometimes twisted into voices calling my name, sometimes into my mother's lullabies. That night, the guide opened on its own. Words spilled across the page in fresh, wet strokes. Rule 20. When summoned, You must come. A chill threaded down my spine. The air in the cabin shifted, cold sweeping through as though the door had been thrown wide. The lanterns dimmed, their flames bowing toward the manual like it was a gravity well. Then the voice came, low, resonant, and all around me. It wasn't coming from the forest. It wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from inside the station itself. You've served long enough in silence. I staggered back, chair toppling. The shadows along the wall lengthened, stretching tall and sharp until they touched the ceiling beams. They twisted into forms, figures with antlered crowns, with hollowed-out torsos, with faces that blurred like smoke, and all of them turned toward me. You followed, the voice said. You obeyed. You endured. Now come. The door creaked, open without touch. Beyond it, the forest wasn't the forest anymore. The path outside glowed faintly, as though every leaf had been painted in ash and bone. I wanted to run, to slam the door, to burn the manual to ash again. But my legs carried me forward anyway. Because Rule 20 wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. The forest swallowed me whole. Every tree seemed taller now, their trunks black as charcoal, their branches writhing in a wind I couldn't feel. The smell was unbearable. Wet soil, iron, rot. My lantern hissed and guttered, and I clutched it close like a shield. The path led me down into a hollow where the trees bent inward, forming an arch that pulsed with faint light. Shapes waited for me there. I recognized some of them. Ellis, pale and smiling, eyes empty sockets that wept black tears. Denise, standing stiff as a puppet, her skin too tight across her bones. The hikers who'd vanished weeks ago, the farmers from town, the children from the missing posters. All of them, gathered, silent, watching. Behind them loomed something, bigger. At first I thought it was a tree, its trunk massive, ribbed like bark. But then it shifted, and I realized it was breathing. A figure, half root, half flesh, its arms stretching into the canopy, its head crowned with tangled antlers that scraped the stars. Its mouth opened. The voice that had called me filled the hollow. You kept the rules. My throat locked. The thing's eyes opened, blazing white, and you broke them. The ground quaked. My lantern shattered in my grip, glass raining across my boots. Darkness swelled, thick and suffocating. From the trees, whispers rose, the voices of everyone I'd known here. They recited the rules, one by one, their tones lilting and mocking. Do not look at the tree line for too long. Do not open the door unless the knock comes in threes. Do not pray when they surround you. Do not let them gather. Each broken rule, hammered against me like a curse, each mistake dragged across my skin like claws. You fed us, the voice boomed. With fear, with blood, with faith. You served. The thing leaned low, antlers scraping the earth, its face lowering to mine. Its features flickered. Ellis's grin, Denise's tired eyes, my own reflection warped into a hollow mask. But service is not enough. The gathered figures stepped closer, their mouths opening wide, wider than human jaws should allow. You must obey until you become the rule. Hands reached for me, cold, damp, gripping. My chest locked with panic. I thrashed, fought, screamed, but their strength was endless. They dragged me toward the hollow's center, toward the thing's yawning mouth. The obedience guide burst open on the ground at my feet, its pages fluttering wild. Words scrawled faster than I could follow until one final line etched itself. In blood-red strokes. Rule 21. When summoned, become what the rules require. The figures pulled harder, the ground swallowing my legs to the knee. The air grew thick with the smell of iron and sap, my lungs burning, and as the massive thing's mouth closed around me, I realized the truth. The rules weren't to keep me alive. They were to make me theirs. When I woke, I was on the floor of the ranger station. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No clawing at the walls, no voices on the wind, no scratching on the roof, just the crackle of the wood stove and the faint hum of the refrigerator. It looked ordinary. The lantern on the desk burned steady, its light soft against the wood walls. My chair was upright again. My boots were lined neatly by the door. The night outside glowed faintly blue with moonlight. For a long moment, I thought it had been a dream, a fevered hallucination brought on by exhaustion and fear. Then I saw the manual. It lay open on the desk, its pages still wet with ink. But they weren't rules anymore. Not exactly. They were logs. My handwriting, though I don't remember writing them, filled page after page recounting every detail of the nights I'd endured, and at the bottom of the latest page, scrawled, in letters that cut deep into the paper, was one new line. Rule 22. When the story ends, pass it on. My stomach twisted. My hand shook as I touched the ink. It smudged under my fingers, sticky and fresh. Pass it on to who? I tried the radio. Static, but no voices, no whispers this time. No one answering my calls. The forest outside was utterly still. The fog had thinned, moonlight pooling between the trunks like milk. But the silence pressed heavy, like a blanket smothering breath. I thought of Denise, of Ellis, of the others who'd vanished. I thought of how they'd stood in the hollow, waiting, their faces stretched and wrong, their voices borrowed by something older than the mountains. And I thought of the moment when that thing had leaned down, when it had told me I must become what the rules require. I checked my reflection in the lantern glass. My eyes looked darker. The whites clouded faintly gray, veins creeping like roots from the corners. My skin felt different, damp almost. My breath fogged in the lantern light, though the cabin was warm. The rules had kept me alive, but they had never promised I would stay myself. I packed. Slowly, carefully, with the numb precision of someone who knew none of it mattered. The manual slid into my bag on its own, as though it had a will. No matter where I placed it, in the drawer, under the bed, even once in the wood stove, I'd turn, and it would be waiting atop my things, its cover unscorched, its edges crisp. It wanted to go with me. Maybe it always had. When dawn broke, stepped outside. The world looked washed clean by the pale gold light, but nothing moved. No birdsong, no rustle of deer in the brush, no bugs buzzing in the warmth. The silence wasn't absence anymore. It was ownership. The mountains belonged to them, and now, maybe, so did I. I made the hike down the ridge in a daze, the manual pressing, like a weight in my pack. Every time I slowed, I heard voices behind me. Alice's laughter, Denise calling my name, my mother humming. I didn't dare stop. By noon, I reached the trailhead, the weathered welcome sign cracked and leaning. My truck sat where I'd left it days ago, dusted with pollen. For the briefest moment, I believed I'd escape. I slid behind the wheel, tossed my bag into the passenger seat, and turned the key. The engine roared to life. But the manual had already moved. It sat open on the dashboard, fluttering in the hot air blowing through the vents. Rule 23. You are never free, only next. The words burned in my head. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles cracked. My reflection in the rearview mirror grinned at me, though I wasn't smiling. That was 3 days ago. I don't know how long I'll last. The changes are faster now. My skin pallid, my breath colder, my voice sometimes echoing in ways it shouldn't. But the rules don't let me die. They don't let me leave. They only let me tell. So this is my last act of defiance. I'm writing everything down. Every rule, every consequence, every scream in the trees, and every face that wasn't a face. I don't care if you believe me. I don't care if you laugh. Because once you've read this, once you've let the rules into your head, they'll know you. And when the knock comes, 3 times, too perfect, too steady, don't open the door. Not unless you're ready to take my place.